Nassim Nobari is the co-founder and program director of Seed the Commons, formerly named Millahcayotl, an organization that works to create food systems that are just, sustainable, and independent of animal exploitation. She is currently conducting research on the global expansion of the dairy industry. Please welcome Nassim.
Thank you so much. So I first want to look at the healthy eating guidelines at the USDA. I don't know if you're already familiar with them, but for me this image is really incredible. We have not only the inclusion of dairy as something necessary for a healthy diet, but dairy actually has its own category within these other generic categories. No other food has its own category. Even kale that everybody thinks is, so healthy doesn't have its own category. So even if milk were a healthy food, it still doesn't exactly explain why we give it so much importance. And the reason we give it this importance is due, I would say, to successful marketing. But at the same time, the success of the dairy industry is not just due to marketing. I think they've had an easy time marketing their product because of the inherent association of milk with children. So vegans, of course, don't really buy into this idea of healthy eating. We don't think that milk is healthy or necessary, and we encourage other people to stop drinking milk. And I think that as we see more people become vegan, as we see more dairy-free products in stores, it's easy to be optimistic and to think that the world is kind of moving in our direction. But the truth is the opposite. The world is moving in the opposite direction, and people around the world are consuming more and more dairy. More importantly, though, there's a cultural shift happening around the world where this idea of healthy eating is becoming the norm. Around the world, people are adopting the idea that milk is the backbone of a healthy diet and children need it to grow and develop. So that might seem a bit surprising that this would be a new idea because we've grown up with this idea, but it's important to realize that milk is not a traditional food in most parts of the world. Traditionally, people have consumed milk in Europe and in a few other places, and milk consumption was exported to other parts of the world through colonization. But even with colonization, it took a while for milk to be adopted as a part of the diet. And so for many parts of the world, this has been extremely recent history. And so this image is from 2004, but essentially it just shows that even now, milk consumption is really highest in rich countries. So the dairy industry sees this as an opportunity for growth. They see it as an opportunity to expand their markets in the global south. So these are projections by Tetra Pak of the increase in dairy consumption in the world over the next 10 years. So, you see India, China, Africa, these are all markets that are expected to grow for the dairy industry. If we look at the example of China, this is dairy consumption per liter and per capita in China over the past few decades. And if you see in the early 2000s, there started to be a really sharp rise in milk consumption. So what happened in 2000, one of the things that happened was that China started a school milk program. And school milk programs have been key in China and in many other countries. So the main driver of growth of the dairy industry is milk distribution through social assistance programs, food aid, it's the inclusion of milk in a lot of development programs. These are always organized a little bit differently. Every country is different, regions are different. Sometimes they work more with governments, sometimes more with nonprofits. But what's really key to understand is that what has helped the dairy industry grow in this way is the partnership with, is public-private partnerships. That's what allows milk to be included in social assistance and food aid and school milk programs. So this here is just one example amongst many, many examples. This is a list of partners of a school milk program in Zambia, And so you see that here we have large companies like Parmalat and Tetra Pak who are working with development agencies, with aid agencies, Ministry of Health, etc. One of the big actors in school milk programs, they have new programs, it seems, every year, is Tetra, oh, sorry. I'm not saying, oh yeah, sorry, is Tetra Pak. So here is a press release. They have many on their website that you can look at. This is a press release from, I think, a couple years ago about their new and expanded school milk programs. And if you look to the right, the countries that are listed, Vietnam, Peru, and the Philippines, are all countries that do not have a tradition of milk consumption. So the dairy industry uses school milk programs and similar sorts of efforts to get into untapped markets. Another group of big actors in this trend are international institutions. You all are probably familiar with UNICEF, the UN organization that focuses on children. UNICEF actually got its start exclusively to distribute milk to children in post-World War II Europe. And once children in Europe were sort of, taken care of, they started expanding that sort of program to other parts of the world. Another very significant actor is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So they convene World Milk Day, World School Milk Day, a yearly World School Milk Conference. Most of these started around the year 2000 as well. And obviously they're working with the dairy industry, and it's about helping the dairy industry grow, often with a focus on development, the idea that they're going to help farmers and countries of the global south. But also, evidently, these projects are about helping children. The problem here is that all of these actors are operating on a Eurocentric premise. And so what I mean by that is the idea that the only way for a child to be healthy and to grow and to develop is by eating the way Europeans eat. If they're not drinking milk, they're not getting nutrition. And so many of the people who work in these programs or for nonprofits, child rights nonprofits, public schools, have very good intentions. They want the best for children. But they have a Eurocentric bias where they don't think that perhaps other foods might be just as healthy or healthier. And that's why it's so easy for the dairy industry to create these public-private partnerships. It's sort of, using this Eurocentric bias for their own profit. Here, these images, I took them from a presentation that was given at the World School Milk Conference in 2005 by a representative of the International Dairy Federation. And these images sort of, tell the story of milk distribution to children in Japan, which started after World War II, and they implemented more school milk programs in the 60s. And so the person speaking, the conference in question was happening in China. And so the person speaking was speaking about Japan as a success story for other countries to model. And they were saying that thanks to milk distribution after World War II, and especially the school milk programs that they started in the 60s, they were able to bring consumption of milk in Japan to 5 liters a year to more than 70 liters a year. And then the person concludes by saying, imagine if the same result were achieved in China. And that is the vision of the dairy industry. So from the perspective of the governments and nonprofits, milk is a vehicle for development of a country, and it's sort of where they focus national aspirations. The idea obviously is that a country is made of children need to be healthy, and there's this idea that the health of children is dependent on adequate nutrition, i.e. milk. So this connection between national aspirations and national identity with milk is not at all new. This was something that was very prominent in the US in the first half of the 2nd century, where milk was really imbued with this idea of perfection. It was the perfect food. And with this idea of perfection, there was the idea of perfectibility of bodies, how our bodies can become perfect. And this idea was very strongly linked with ideas around the strength and the health and the superiority of the American people. So at that time, and of course still later, to become American, immigrants were strongly encouraged to adopt American food habits. So this is that the child is healthy and still also dressed away that shows us this is a marriage child. Whereas the other child is sort of fresh off the boat. So it is that night 442, you read the text. And again, this idea that if you don't eat the right way, you're going to be malnourished. But eating the right way means eating a very way. Now, of course, this seems crazy, race not that, we think like that, and it's true about how these ideas expressed so unwanted these days, but we do still have the same ideas. So this is much more from India, conflating the developmental children, the developmental nations, and the developmental children, of course, on something. Here, this is now by the Millahcayotl Association, saying that children don't milk more real. So again, the message here, remember that the reason is when Mexico don't milk. The message here is that children don't adopt Western dietary norms are inherently weaker. They're going to be malnourished. These are pictures that I took recently. I was researching this in the south of Mexico. I took these pictures in a market. These are foods that are distributed by the Mexican government to people who are low income, indigenous, marginalized. And I took these pictures at a local market. So typically, you'll find a lot of these foods. The one on the right is packaged milk at markets because the indigenous people often resell them. They don't want to eat them or drink them. And for those of you who speak Spanish, lo bueno que les da el gobierno. So another thing that I did in Mexico is that I spoke to many non-indigenous Mexicans. And I was always reminded by that ad about the Japanese people who don't drink milk, because the perception that many non-indigenous Mexicans had about the indigenous diet was not all that far off. The idea was that, well, of course they're malnourished, of course they're short because they don't eat well. And often this, the cause was pinned more on culture rather than on economy. The diet is inherently insufficient because they only eat beans, they only eat vegetables, etc. And so what one person told me is, of course they're malnourished, they don't want to eat lo bueno que les da el gobierno, the good things that the government is giving them, they don't want to eat them. So the problem of malnutrition is pinned on a cultural problem of people not choosing the right foods, being milk. So something to remember is that in places in the world where milk is not a traditional food, the majority of the population tends to be lactose intolerant. That's actually the default state of all mammals. And so in a place like Mexico where people are not, are reselling milk on the market, the majority of people are actually lactose intolerant. So it really raises a lot of questions. If we portray food that does not contain milk as being deficient, and we portray European bodies as being the norm, European bodies that can digest milk, that means that bodies that cannot digest milk are defective. So what do you do about it? If you need to give your children milk to develop, and the country needs healthy children to develop, how do you deal with lactose intolerance? So you would think that lactose intolerance would be a problem for the dairy industry. That they would, try to build their market in China, and people would say, well, this gives me stomachache, I'd rather turn to something else, eat something else. But the power of the West to define dietary norms, and the power of institutions, social workers, teachers, all of these people to define what is healthy and what is necessary is so powerful that the opposite happens, and lactose intolerance becomes an opportunity for the dairy industry. So in a place like China, what they do is they offer fermented drinks that don't have the same lactose quantity. In Mexico, these are a couple pictures that I took in a grocery store. There's a crazy variety of lactose-free milks. It's insane. And lactose-free products are the fastest growing dairy market because people need to deal with this necessity of milk by just, portraying lactose intolerant as a problem that needs to be dealt with, and hence we go the route of lactose-free products. So what's happening with this expansion is really the homogenization of diets everywhere and the imposition of Western dietary norms everywhere. These are some examples. I know at the end, these are some examples of some of the nutritious foods that could be eaten in Chiapas, where I was taking those pictures, but they're not eaten as much as they should be for economic reasons, but also for cultural reasons. Because as we promote Western foods, we're also promoting the idea that other foods are less valuable and they become less visible. So this research has really allowed me to see that it's at an institutional level that dietary norms are decided. That's what determines food culture. And so I think that as animal rights activists, we really need to be working not only at the individual level, but at the institutional level. And we need to get involved in what's happening in schools, what's happening in international institutions. And along those lines, Feed the Commons this year will be launching a campaign to get milk out of San Francisco public schools. Yay.